done something. You sat through some Sphinx.
No, I never.
Really?
Oh, we didn't watch it.
Okay, everybody. Well, good evening. Welcome. And let's kick this off. Everybody here in the room, and I believe there's 3 people out there so far in Streamland. Welcome. Tonight's going to be hopefully a very interesting talk. Augmented reality is one of those things that's a current great buzzword in the industry, and we at SMPTE are starting to find out a bit more and more about it. So I'm looking forward to learning a lot from Professor Carl Rosendahl of Carnegie Mellon University. Also, just as a heads up, the next meeting actually is going to be only in about a couple of weeks' time, because at the end of October is the annual tech conference for SMPTE down in Hollywood. So, as we did a couple of years ago, we're going to go to Drone World Expo, which is happening in San Jose at the Convention Center. Drone World Expo, yes. And so that's the 3rd and 4th of October, which is a Tuesday and a Wednesday. And if you are interested, let me know, because we can get free expo passes. Can't get you free conference passes, but we can get free expo passes. And also the section meeting will be held there on the Tuesday evening in the Convention Center. We have an option of a small room there we can have a meeting in. And last time we did it was very interesting. Learned a lot about use of drones in video production, and hopefully this year will be similar. I'm still trying to finalize the details, so I can't tell you too much, but other than the fact there will be something happening. So that's it. Having said that, thanks very much to Patrick Conboy, Gary, to Sony for hosting us here, and Carl, over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for inviting me here tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let me get the slides started here. I'm going to be talking about work that we've done at Carnegie Mellon in prototyping agents for augmented reality. But I thought I'd give you a little background first as to how I got there. I started a company in 1980, fresh out of Stanford University, doing computer graphics, which in 1980 was not an industry yet. But in the early 80s, we set a very bold goal to create fully computer-animated feature films, something that would not be possible for almost another 15 years. It was an incredibly exciting time, during which we figured out how to bring characters to life for the big screen. We were the first ones to work with Jim Henson doing a live, interactive, computer-generated Muppet. We were the first ones to bring the Pillsbury Doughboy to life in the digital world. He was already 20 or 25 years old, stop-motion animated. We brought Homer Simpson into the 3rd dimension, if you happen to have seen that episode. We brought Batman onto the big screen digitally for the first time. And finally got our chance in the mid-90s to produce DreamWorks' first fully computer-animated film and the second computer-animated film ever released, a film called Ants, followed shortly after that by everyone's favorite ogre, Shrek. And it was an amazing experience to be a part of that. And we finally, in the mid-90s, reached our goal that we had set 15 years prior to that. And it was a very exciting time, and we got to learn how to bring characters to life. But we also kept doing that. I left PDI, explored a few other things, but really deep inside of me, wanted to continue to do that, but in an additional way of bringing them to life in our world. Not just on the big screen, but something we could actually touch, maybe, and interact with, and have a relationship with, kind of like Homer here. But that vision that I'd love to see for the AR world is not one of glowing billboards and flashing streaks of light showing you where you're supposed to do, and floating Post-it notes, and a lot of the kind of visual noise we see, but really one of characters living in the world, interacting with us, and characters that can teach us things, that can be companions for us, that can help us when we want to, or just be entertaining. And what I'd like to do is share some of the work that we've done at Carnegie Mellon in that area. I've been at CMU now for 10 years. Here in the Bay Area, not based in Pittsburgh, our group, the Entertainment Technology Center, has a satellite office out here, which I'm the director of. little background on the ETC. About 20 years ago, Randy Pausch from the computer science department and Don Marinelli from the drama department got together and said, in the future, which is now, artists and engineers are going to have to work together to create content. And so they founded the Entertainment Technology Center to do that. So today we have a curriculum that is very project-based, where we put students together to work on projects for the whole semester in teams of 4 to 6 students. That's the primary thing they do for the whole semester. It's a diverse group of students in every way, but contextually here in that we have students who are artists and students who are computer scientists. And they have to work together to figure out how to solve problems. It's a 2-year master's program. We're on a semester's program, so they take a core curriculum in their first semester, and then we'll have as much as 3 other semesters of working on a single project each semester. The projects we do fall into 3 primary areas. One is transformational games, so things that have a social impact, a cultural impact, an educational impact, something like that. Innovation by design, where we explore new technologies, new design ideas, new directions, and interactive storytelling. The AR projects that I'll be talking about today primarily fall into innovation by design. We're not yet trying to change the world and influence people using these tools. We have to first figure out how to even make them work. So I'm going to talk about some lessons. Yeah, absolutely. There are about 140 students in the program overall. Each semester they can apply to spend one of their semesters out here, and we will have typically between 10 and 20 students for the semester out here. So that works out to 2 to 4 projects usually, and there are 2 of us who are faculty members. We're embedded inside of Electronic Arts right here in Redwood Shores, so they're surrounded by people who are creating games and exciting interactive content all the time. And we work very closely with them. The projects that I'll be talking about today are specifically projects that I've been involved with out here. There are a lot of other things going on at ETC that are as relevant to the work we're doing. There are 3 main areas that we need to explore to do the big vision of AR that we'd like to do. First is sensing the world. So augmented reality, it's reality at one sense, and the computers, the machines, everything behind it have to understand the world around us. That's both visually, audibly, and a lot of other senses that we'll touch on a little bit. The character itself, so what we've learned from doing character animation applies here. What the game industry has learned from bringing characters to life in interactive environments all applies. And then the user interface itself, how we interact with those characters, what we do to get their attention, and how they react to us, and how that influences the world around us. Just to touch on those 3 items real quick, in the sensing area, we're seeing the technology evolve through a couple steps. So in the visual world, this is first just tracking our world, and we're seeing that a lot with phone devices now, being able to overlay something on the phone that tracks with the real world. So as I move the phone, the object that it's rendering is staying there in space. So that's simply just tracking the environment, has no knowledge yet of what's in that world. The second step is scanning that world and really understanding what's the geometry out there. Once we understand that geometry, we can deal with things like occlusion and other things in that world. And you have items like the Google Tango device, which has all sorts of sensors which allow you to see the world and scan that world and bring it in so you get some of the geometry. The missing step next is understanding that world that we bring in. So what the Tango sees is really a point cloud of data. That's turned into a mesh, so it sees the world as if we had just laid a giant sheet over everything, right? And it really doesn't understand it. It doesn't understand that that's a chair, that's a table, and the world around us. The next step we really need to get to is understanding that. And that's not just true for the visual side, it's true for the audio side also. So the first part, tracking, being able to just get audio into our world and out of it. And then the scanning part would actually, the computer starting to make sense of that, right? So you have being able to do speech-to-text conversion, being able to use one of the many tools are out there where I can have it listen to a song, and it will tell me what song is playing. Doesn't mean it understands the song, certainly doesn't mean it understands the lyrics, and in fact, speech to text doesn't mean that it understands at all what those characters represent. The next step of that is understanding, and that's where natural language processing is really doing a lot of wonderful research now and bringing in the ability not just to take my speech and turn it into text, but to turn it into context and intent and figure out what it is that I'm actually meaning. And that goes beyond just visual and audible too, being able to maybe tactfully understand the world. Oh, this is hard, this is soft, what does that mean to my world? All of our senses come into play there. We've used off-the-shelf hardware for all the projects we've done, starting out about 3 or 4 years ago with the Epson BT200. So it's a headset. It plugs into what used to be a functioning Android device, but we know what happens over time. This device has 2 displays on it, so you actually get a stereoscopic image about the size of a sheet of paper held at arm's length. So my field of view is about like that. It's not a lot of contrast on this device. They've come out with a couple of revisions on it since then. But it did allow us to do it, to put characters and put things into the world in front of us. It's not doing any scanning of the environment. So it's really just overlaying, has accelerometers and a few other things inside of it that allow us to then track the environment and keep objects stationary in there. We moved from that to the Google Tango tablet, where we could start scanning, and I'll show you one project we worked on, which made this extra exciting, because we actually did this. Put it in a headset, and then made someone wear that. So you're blind to the world, right? But it was rendering a virtual world for us, but completely tracking, not just tracking so that the world it was rendering was tracking along with us, but it was scanning that world and building a Minecraft-like world in its place. So you would see a little hill of blocks here. So the goal was, for the students, I'm sorry, was can you build something where someone is in a virtual world, untethered, running around in the real world, and they feel safe and secure in that process. And they actually succeeded in doing that. We'll see a little bit of footage about that. And finally, I didn't bring it with me, but we're currently working with the Microsoft HoloLens, which has a lot of both of those things combined and a lot of other processing power and stuff on top of it. So that's the scanning part of the equation. The character part of the equation, equally interesting to pursue. And we've kind of divided the things that we need to do with characters into 3 pots. The role that the character plays. So who is this character that we're dealing with, and what is our relationship with that character, right? Are they a companion? Are they a teacher? Are they an adversary? Why are they in the world with us? Our initial projects are basically treating them as agents or butlers who are doing things for you. The second part of that is personalities. So, okay, we know this person is a companion or a teacher, but what kind of a character are they? And if you go and look at different character models, there's a bunch out there, but basically, is the person an introvert or an extrovert, passive or aggressive, but neurotic or stable? And you can take all those things and plug them together and get all sorts of different personalities that a character might take on. And finally, the interactions with that character. What happens when I do get that character's attention and I say something to it or I interact with it somehow? How does it react? What does it do? And what is our relationship as we interact with each other? And as I interact with that character, could its role change? Could its personality? Could its mood change based on what I'm doing? So these are all interesting areas for us to explore, independent of the hardware that we're using to do that on. Finally, the third part of that equation, the user interface itself. Really, how are we representing that? What are those interactions? What are the goals we're trying to accomplish? And how does that happen? And that happens with not just the visual part that these tools provide, but the audible part, the tactile part, interfacing with, we did one project with IoT, so creating devices that spoke to each other. Kind of broader extensions of the definition of augmented reality. Okay, so let's start getting into some of the fun demos and lessons for our projects. And really, each of these projects can explore into these 3 areas, but they don't necessarily do all of those on each project. So sometimes we'll explore just one of these areas. And the track we've gone on is starting out very simply with the Epson, just put a character into my world and let me interact with it somehow. Then nail things down in our world, and then start scanning our world so that we understand it and can put things in it a little better. Then let's start playing with personalities and roles for the characters. And now the projects we're working on currently are starting to deal with much more natural forms of interaction. So voice in particular is where we're really looking now. Okay, so the first project I'd like to talk about, this is the team of students who worked on it, and they all choose team names. This was palimpsest. And so they were given a set of the Epson glasses and asked to create a character that lives in that world that does something interesting and useful with as natural an interaction as you can with it, given all the limitations of the hardware. So they settled on doing a navigation assistant. One of the nice things about this hardware is it actually works outdoors, which Tango and HoloLens don't, because they're using infrared to scan the environment. Epson glasses aren't scanning the environment. They really don't care what's out there. They're just overlaying on top. So they created a character that would help you navigate to get to one place to wherever you want to go. Interestingly, they used voice interaction. So here's a quick demo.
Hello, I am an augmented reality companion robot, the first of my kind. Where should we go?
Let's go to Starbucks.
We are going to Starbucks at 264 Redwood Shores Parkway, Redwood City, which is 0.3 miles away. Is that right?
Yes, you got it.
Please follow me. Turn right. We have reached our destination.
Woohoo! Woo. So I was really happy with what they were able to do. And when we look at the pipeline that they had to create with this device, it's pretty impressive. So let's just talk about what they ran into, and then we'll talk about their pipeline a little bit. First off is they had to design around the limitations of the platform. So you can see in this picture about what the field of view is, but that's superimposed on the field of view of a camera, not on your almost 180-degree field of view, right? So the character had to exist in a very small space in front of you. And when he leaves that space, he's gone. That's why it's a little flying robot, right? If he lived on the ground in front of you, you would never see him unless you were looking down, which is not what you want to do when you're trying to navigate around the city. So you want it to be heads up. We didn't want him a block away from you. So he had to be close to you and not get clipped by the field of view. So little flying character. Robot because, well, we're using text-to-speech on the device, actually in the cloud, and it sounds kind of robotic. So perfect. Little flying robot to help us out. So they designed around the limitations of the platform really well. There were some interesting character cues. The first time they had the character running, you would say something to it, and it would just float there, and then it would respond to you because it's going through this huge process to figure out what it's going to say next. And people would think it didn't hear them or didn't understand them, so they would start talking again, and you'd get into a death spiral. So they did a couple things. One, when it's listening, you may have noticed, he turns his head when he's listening, just kind of like a dog who's listening to you. So when he hears you, he's doing that. And when he thinks, he looks up and bounces, just like a person. And people actually picked up on those cues really fast. We didn't have to explain to the people we tested it on what was going on. They said, oh yeah, he's processing the information somehow. And that suddenly made them really calm, very patient, didn't start talking again, and everything progressed very smoothly. And the other big lesson here is always test the hardware first. So where did I put the glasses? So this was great. His name is Sparky. What Sparky's supposed to do is he knows that you're going to go down to the corner, and then there's a waypoint there, and then you're going to turn right because Starbucks is over there. So Sparky would stay between you and the waypoint, your next waypoint. When you got there, he would turn right and head that direction. Well, for him to know that, he has to know what direction you're going. So he may know that the waypoint is due north from where you are. So he will always stay due north relative to you. Well, turns out the compass in this thing is mounted like this. So they got all the way to the final week and finally turned on the waypoint navigation part because they hadn't tested it out yet. And for some reason, the hardware engineers just put that chip in sideways. So it knows which direction north is as long as you're looking at the ground. Or if you look up, it thinks that that's the other direction. So they had to fudge it. So Sparky basically would just say, turn right. And then he'd move left off the screen. And then a little while later, he'd come back into the middle of the screen and continue on. So that was a good lesson. It's like, oh, yeah, make sure the specs actually are what the specs are. The process they went through to make this happen, so this is a little Android device, has Wi-Fi connectivity. They need it to talk to the cloud. So the first thing you did is you pair this with your phone. And then when you talked, it recorded your speech. It sent the speech up to a speech-to-text engine in the cloud, took that text, sent it over to another API called wit.api, which did text to context, and it knew it was doing it was a navigation tool. So it would send back to their engine, which was running back on this, that, oh, he's looking for a restaurant called Starbucks, and the phone knows your location. So it would then take that and go to Google Maps, find out where a Starbucks was, read you back the address. And if you agree that that's where you want to go, it went to Google Maps for walking and got all the waypoints, and then navigated you there. And then the speech was all happening. Text was generated on this, went up to the cloud for text to speech, got streamed back down. So it was 3 or 4 or 5 different APIs in the cloud that it was talking to through this device. But it worked. It worked. And they did a great job of designing around the limitations of the hardware they had to make something that's actually really compelling. So this was 3.5 years ago. And there's still nothing like that that's out there yet. I think we will see them soon on our next generation of phones. Okay, so that was Palimpsest. Illusions was the next quarter, given the same device. And that worked well, but it was time to actually start tracking things in the world. So this has limited tracking abilities if you give it something to look at. So we asked them to do something where it's actually tracking the environment, putting something in the environment, but you have 2 of these, make it a social interaction for 2 people. So they designed a game for 2 people to play in the world, and we'll show you a demo of this game first.
We are Team Illusions, a group of graduate students at Carnegie Mellon University Entertainment Technology Center. This semester, we are using Epson Moverio BT200 glasses as our platform. Our goal was to make a multi-user experience on these glasses. So we created a simple tower defense game which allows 2 players to compete with each other. In our game, there are 3 minions, fire, water, and wood. Player can summon each of these minions by staring or pointing at them using their head, which is the core mechanic of our game.
Sorry, I didn't realize it was going to be that loud. So, interactive game for 2 people. It worked. You could play the game. It was all controlled through gaze. You may have seen this little circle you can see there. You look at the character that you want to start along the way, and it would do a little countdown so that you could confirm that that's what you wanted, and then the character would start. So this device has no ability to capture gestures. You can do things on the phone, but we want it to be a hands-free experience. So it was all gaze head direction. So it worked, but this really limits your social interaction. You have a small field of view. You have to keep the marker within that field of view so that you can see the game that you're playing. If you look up at the people you're playing with, then it kind of loses sync and has to come back. Plus, once you actually put, not just these, a lot of these devices on, not only is your field of view for what's rendered very small, but it blocks out a lot of your other vision, and you tend to focus strictly on what's being rendered there. That's true with just about every AR device I've tried, that you really get so engaged with what's being rendered there that you don't pay attention to the real world, which is a feature of the device, that you get to actually see the real world. And then the gaze control was really a pain. And we've confirmed that with one of the projects we did on the HoloLens, that your head just gets tired of having to steer around and look at things. Excuse me. So interesting advancement. Next project we did was the first one we did on the Tango tablet when it was brand new. And the goal we gave them is really to now explore the ability to actually track your motion, not just overlay on top of it. So it was, while the Epson glasses were just floating something in front of you without knowing the world or attaching something to a marker, the Tango actually allowed you to have full 6 degrees of freedom as you move around. Something we completely take for granted on all of our phone devices now. So Pokemon Go and every other AR app that you've used already takes full advantage of the accelerometers in the phone being able to do this. This takes it farther because it's actually scanning the world. I'll show you what they built first. Come on, play. There we go. So I'm going to just pause here. What's happening is you can go through and you have a whole bunch of three-dimensional blocky objects, and you can build a space with those objects in it, and that becomes the playground, basically. And then you or another player can go in and basically explore the device or the things that you put in that playground, and it can be in a very, very large space. It would work in this room beautifully. Go explore it, but you're looking for little hidden fruits, and when you find one, you get to shoot it, of course. And so you have bombs and things you can throw at it. You're trying to collect the 5 items they've hidden, and in the process, you get to blow things up and make blocks fall and use all the physics engine. And it was actually very, very fun to do. So this is the authoring part. So what was really funny about this is this is 2015, so just 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. We're really used to the fact that we can play Pokemon Go and run around and find things now. 2.5 years ago, people did not understand that. And I'm going to let John, who was the designer and one of the producers, explain this.
One interesting observation from a playtest was, during the tutorial, when the game gives the players a hint of try walking, some players actually try everything but walking, such as swiping the screen, touching with 2 fingers, tapping repeatedly, and so on, and it takes them a while before they actually try taking a physical step, because that thought that a game could actually use their physical locomotion is beyond their wildest imagination. But when they finally do take that step, is when the magic happens, and that's reflected on their face.
So that's just crazy to me. I mean, we saw that happen, we experienced it, because for us, you know, we got to hold this technology. We know it does this. Let's do it. And so they built a game that did that, and no one else knew that who wasn't familiar with the technology, and it was really fun. We'll walk, and people would do this, and they'd do this, and then you'd like give them a push, and they'd go, oh, wow. Now, of course, we all take that for granted, but I think that's a really important lesson now, because now everyone would say, well, that's intuitive. Of course you do that. It's an intuitive thing. This is an intuitive motion on a tablet. It wasn't originally until you see it once. Then you get it, and everything's fine. But as designers, we have to realize that what's obvious to us and what we may think is intuitive is initially a very alien concept to people. So that was a huge breakthrough at the time. Seems pretty simple now, a couple years later. But it was fun working with the Tango tablet. And the next semester, we took that and we said, OK, now we're going to push this a little bit farther. And we really want to strap it to your head, right? So there's different terms for augmented reality. So some people call it mixed reality. Some call it augmented reality. There's a lot of argument over what means what. But there's one division that's kind of interesting. And it depends which side of your fence you're on. I tend to go, augmented reality is this experience, which is I see the real world and you're augmenting it with something on top. And mixed reality is I'm actually seeing a completely pixelated world. A lot of those pixels could be coming in from a camera. But if they're coming in from a camera, I now control all of those pixels. I control everything you see, and I can manipulate that really well. I think that's mixed reality. Most people think it's the other way around. I don't know. But we had this device, and we wanted to strap it on your face. And of course, you're only going to see pixels when you hold it this way. This, by the way, it's like a VR headset, so it has two lenses in it, and it divides the screen in half, gives you left, right. So it's a stereoscopic view you ultimately see. But we basically ask these students to take this, strap it to your head. You can use the camera on it, but it's a single camera. It's not a stereoscopic camera. Or you can build a virtual world. But the goal is to have people walk around in a world that you have created from scanning the real world and have them feel safe and secure. So they designed a game around doing that, and we'll have a preview of the game here. So it was actually really fun, and it worked beautifully, particularly if you had a very kind of rectilinear space that you were in that jibed well with the Minecraft-like world that they were building. But as you walked around, it's scanning, it's figuring out the point cloud, and then it's populating it with blocks. And so you have this kind of desert garden world. And we learned a similar lesson to what we learned with the other Tango project, which is people are really hesitant to walk around, particularly when this world is forming around you and you're untethered in a real world with real obstacles. It's kind of scary. So they built a game around it. You can see on the screen there's a little block that says touch, because this can sense that you have a hand out in front of you. So there was a small story of these worms that you have to go capture in the world and get rid of, otherwise they're going to destroy your trees. And when you find them, plants blossom and grow. So you can basically help the world grow plants in it and go kill the things. So they would have these goals that you had to go over there and touch that to accomplish it. So they actually designed a game mechanic that made you want to walk around and explore the world, which you didn't normally want to do. And it worked beautifully. And people would do it and walk uncomfortably fast through our hallways. It was kind of exciting sometimes watching people do it. There are some really interesting lessons from this. It was a very, what we call, high-friction experience, in that there was a lot of stuff you had to go through in order to even experience it. First of all, you have to get this running. You have to set up the game. You have to scan a little bit of the world first so it knows where you are. Then you have to put it in this headset, and then you have to put the headset on and adjust the optics so it works for you. Now you finally get to play the game. And that people just don't like to go through all the mechanics. So it's very high friction for the experience. And for people who did it, it was either magical or nauseating. The frame rate was not real-world frame rate, right? It was probably 20 or 30 frames per second. They were pretty smart about how they built the world, but that throws you off a little bit. There are times where it could lose tracking and things might happen. When people walked through the world, they would leave a trail of blocks behind them that eventually would go away. So it was very exciting or disturbing. And there are so many other limitations that they actually, just to increase the friction a little bit more, there's a safety video you have to watch first, and we'll play that because they did a great job on this.
Welcome to Garden's Mixed Reality. Project Tango will not work well in sunlight, outdoors, or with moving objects and people. For your safety, be aware of windows, mirrors, or any reflective surfaces in your environment. First, start the experience in a well-lit room. Ideally, find furniture to stand in front of while parallel to the wall. Before opening the Garden app, lock your tablet orientation. Flip the tablet upside down and hold the tablet still while it connects to your room. Look around. Carefully put the Tango in the headset. Adjust the headset for both eyes until you get your focus. Enjoy!
So a lot of fun. They did a great job on the video, but lots of friction. And by the way, some of those limitations are true with the current generation of devices. So your phone, whichever AR kit or core you have on your phone, will probably have issues with windows and mirrors and things like that. We never let anyone play this around a stairwell. A lot of dangers involved. So, okay, our next project, we finally got into dealing with characters in a little more depth. So this team was asked to create an interaction with an actual character and explore some AI or role and personality things with that character, and give him a fairly simple task, him or her or it, a fairly simple task for the character to do and really explore the personalities, which is what they did. So they built a character who worked inside a hallway at Electronic Arts. There's an internal museum that shows the history of EA. So the role of the character could vary. So it could be a guide to help you through the museum. And a guide basically has a schedule, right? And the guide wants you to spend a minute here reading about this. It's going to tell you about that. And then it wants you to move on to the next thing. So it could be a guide. It could be a teacher. A teacher wants you to read this. And a teacher would be very happy. The more time you want to spend exploring that wall and that information, the happier the teacher is going to be. So the teacher would be very encouraging. If you want to stay there and read more, that's fine. I'll wait. And then the other is a pretty restless companion who would rather not be there, who's like, really? Let's go, let's go. So 3 different pacings depending on the role that the character had. And then they had a lot of dials for the personality. So you could actually, on a linear scale, dial up a number of factors about how moody it was, how impatient it might be, other things like that, and its personality. And then they did a lot of tests through that of different types of personalities and how people interacted with that. So let's see a short video of this character.
Hey there, I'm Mixie, and this is the Electronic Arts History Museum. This panel is dedicated to EA Sports, our first genre of games formed in the early 1990s. John Madden was our first exclusive celebrity to agree to work with only us and not with our competitors. Let's carry on, shall we?
I should have mentioned this is on the HoloLens.
Oh, I'd love to tell you about that. This panel is dedicated to EA Sports, our first genre of games formed in the early 1990s. John Madden was our first exclusive celebrity to agree to work with us.
So Mixie was using pre-recorded voice for the character because he had a limited number of things that he was going to talk about. And so they basically scripted out a lot of different ways for him to read that depending on his anxiety level and role and stuff. So depending on the role and personality types and such, you'd read different scripts as you went through. And Mixie was really guided by the intent of the person. So there was no voice interaction. You didn't say anything to Mixie, and you didn't use your gestures at all. But Mixie knew the environment, and as you walked around, Mixie would decide based on your intent and what you were doing, how Mixie wanted you to either speed up or slow down through the process there. And it worked pretty well. There were some interesting lessons there. They had a real good definition of the roles and responsibilities and an ability to navigate through that. We'd love to explore that a lot deeper. As I mentioned, the control was based really just on your intent, so not fully interactive yet, so more reactive than interactive. And finally, field of view is still a big issue, even with a HoloLens. So instead of a field of view the size of a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, it's now a much larger piece of paper. So it's still a limited field of view. Same issues we had 2.5 years prior of it's very disturbing when a character you're interacting with gets clipped at the edges. And you don't want this character on the ground. You don't want it to be, because you're going to be looking pretty much level at the displays. And if the character is a character that's standing on the ground, it would always get chopped off. So it would be this floating torso, which would be very disturbing unless you scan down. So a flying robot it was once again. Next project we did on the HoloLens, the team called themselves HaloLens, just to confuse us a little bit. And it was to basically take, instead of exploring a lot of different roles, take one role of the agent and explore that more deeply and let us interact with that character a lot more. They decided to do a horror experience in a given space. So they would go into space ahead of time and set it up with a lot of digital props in the room. And you had a little cat character that basically worked kind of like a Cheshire cat. So it was dead, but I don't think it knew it yet. But this cat could fly around. So again, we got a floating head to interact with because of these clipping issues. But because this was a horror film and it was all happening kind of in this surreal environment, the headset was a part of the game, part of the experience. It's basically a window that allows you to see into the ghost world and see what's going on. So the fact it was clipping, well, that was just an artifact of the tool that you're using to see into their world. So let's see it for a demo. Oh, the sound had a whole bunch of people talking in it. That's why I cut it off. So the character basically was afraid because there were these ghosts who were coming to get it. So ghosts like this, and when you turn away and turn back, the ghost will have been closer to you. And it was actually, I'm going to just pause this for a minute. It was actually really creepy, even though it was kind of a cute little ghost. But if it's sitting 10 feet away and you turn back and it's now 5 feet away, the fact that it moved closer to you while you weren't looking and isn't moving while you are looking is really disturbing. And you could see when you turned back that it shook a little bit because it had been moving, so the physics worked. That worked really well. And then there were words on the wall, and if you said, in this case, Cassandra, that would kill those ghosts. So you had to go searching around the room for these branded words that were a fire on the wall that would be your cue as to how to get rid of the ghosts. And then as the game progressed, more things appeared in the environment that would block your view, get in your way. Obviously, they couldn't really hurt you, but they could impede your progress through the game. And I guess Sony is about to shut down. I'll keep going. So some of our lessons there, single-purpose character worked really well. We could be really focused on just how we interacted with that one character. They used the field of view issue as a design element. They basically created a conceit in the game that explained why you had this field of view, and it's okay for things to be clipped. And the voice interaction worked really well when it worked, but it didn't always work. Oh, and the gaze control was really tiring because you had to look at the ghosts when you said the word. And just, again, moving your head around with this got tiring. So voice was great when it worked. That inspired us to do some more stuff with voice. So natural language processing is making a lot of progress now. There's some really interesting AIs. So we challenged this team using VR instead of AR. So this was all done in a Vive, HTC Vive environment. Although I think they ported over to Oculus also. But what we challenged them with is really explore natural language processing. So create an experience with a character in there where our primary means of interacting with the character is through voice, but not where you have a menu of commands that you could say, which is really the way the prior game worked. There were limited vocabulary, but where you can actually speak to it any way you want. So what they ended up creating was this environment with a talking robot here, but you've landed. The backstory is a little convoluted. We won't go into it in detail, but basically, you're now a chef at an alien restaurant, or you're the delivery person. So you have this alien robot character who has to go get stuff for you so you can fulfill orders and give them out the delivery window. The problem is the things that you have to deliver do not have words that we know because they are strange alien fruit objects. So they built a way where that character can speak English, but you need to teach it words because the words it has for those things you can't say, and we'll hear what they call it. So you actually had to teach this character a vocabulary of words for certain objects. So it was nouns, and then you had to teach it colors for objects. And then you could say, this is a banana, this is red, go get me a red banana, and it would go get you a red one of those things. And you would do that. So let's see an example of this.
Hi, Babs.
Oh geez, I see you don't speak robot. Well, I sure hope you're at least a decent server. I'm Babs, this joint's cook. What's your name?
I'm Andrew.
Well, pleasure to make your acquaintance, Andrew. So, there aren't English words for these dishes, but I call them... And... Try grabbing one of the fruits behind you to teach me human words you can pronounce for this order.
This is yellow.
Yellow.
What is this?
I don't know.
Get me this but yellow.
Got it. Can you give it a name?
This is a hot dog.
Hot dog.
This is the color blue.
Blue.
This is a burrito.
Burrito.
Get me a blue burrito.
One blue burrito coming right to ya.
Get me a red one of these.
Which one are you calling one of these?
This is a one of these.
Well, congratulations. I think we passed the test. Maybe it won't be so bad working with a human after all.
So you could use any word that was in the dictionary in the cloud. So basically any word in the English language that wasn't a color because it needed colors also. You could call that thing whatever you wanted. And people got very expressive sometimes when they discovered that feature. But it worked beautifully, and you heard the voice sounded very natural. They used a similar pipeline to the one that was used a few years ago. So they were doing, let's see, speech to text locally, so it's a Windows machine. So they were using Cortana to do the speech to text, sending the text up to API.ai, which is a natural language processor. That would return them context, so it would say, for example, it knows it's looking for a name, so it would say the name you're looking for is Andrew. Or the noun you're looking for is burrito, or the color you're looking for is yellow. You would get that back. They had their own little engine for processing that. It would drive a whole bunch of animation that they'd created. They'd send it back up again. They were using Watson to do the text-to-speech, which sounds beautiful. And the turnaround on that was super fast. You saw the delays in there. It wasn't shortened. It was actually that quick coming around. And then they trained the natural language engine. So every time someone would say something that it didn't understand, you basically have a log of the entire conversation, And you can go in and say, oh, in this case, this was the word we were looking for, so it now has that example. You could, if people were giving nonsensical or asking it questions that it didn't know, you could provide sample answers to that. You could broaden out its vocabulary. So by the end, it felt really natural. And in cases where it didn't understand what you were saying, it just didn't get in a loop saying, I didn't understand that. I didn't understand that. Had a lot of varied responses it could have. It wasn't perfect at the speech to text. There were a lot of things like, it was very common for someone to hold one of those and say, this is a pair. And it basically, its response was essentially a pair of what? And then the other thing that they found on this was, see this little text up here. It says, this is a brown garbage truck. You probably noticed that when you're watching the video. People were never 100% confident. This was a really new experience, similar to, oh, I can walk around. It's a really new experience for people that I'm talking to this character and it's actually hearing me. And they found that just by putting that up there so that you could read what you just said was a huge benefit for the player in that they had confidence that whatever they had said was heard and it's now dealing with that. They also knew that if it didn't understand what they said, they could see what it thought they said. And so it ran into issues with people trying to correct it. Yeah.
So the object in the front is actually being held up by the user. What
Yes.
was it holding up?
Oh, so the Vive has a hand controller. And so they were just moving in space with the hand controller. And basically, you would put the hand controller where you see the virtual object and pull the trigger. And that allows you to grab it and then hold it.
It wasn't that, it was something else.
It was air. They were just holding air. I mean, a physical manual controller with buttons on it, but there was no object in the room. Yeah. So we learned from that. First of all, teaching turned out to be really fun. So teaching this character nouns and colors was actually a compelling experience for people, and they felt rewarded when the character said back what they said, and actually, I taught you this is blue, and I taught you that, or this is yellow, or this is blue, and that's a burrito, and I said, get me a blue burrito, and you brought that to me. That's really exciting. There was a really good connection with the character. People actually had fun talking to Babs. And voice is really compelling. I talked about this, but the text feedback helped a lot. And I think that will probably be true for a couple years. Yeah.
So you pepper them out. Is that just because it's...
Yeah, they didn't do one do lip sync.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was the goal was to be able to do the voice interaction with it, and so they took a few shortcuts to make so they could focus on what they needed to do. Okay, where next? The project we're doing this semester is an extension of that, but in the HoloLens. So what we've asked the students to do is a different experience than what we did with Babs, but use that same pipeline, because it actually worked, but don't render a full 3D world, just render our character, and use the HoloLens to put it into the world we're in. Figure out a different kind of character and a different task for that character to do, but primarily we want to have a voice interaction with that character. So we are now 4 weeks into a 16-week semester. It's all public information. So they're going to create a character that is basically lives in the HoloLens. And when you put it on, you can summon the character and it comes out. And it's very happy to actually be out in your world now. So happy, in fact, that it would love to take a picture in that world and lets you interact with that character to decorate that space. So it's going to go online. You can say, oh, yeah, we'll see exactly what happens, but something along the line of, I'd like a picture of a sunset. And it will go to Flickr and pull out a picture of a sunset, and then you can tell it where to put it in the space. There'll be a limited number of things that you can ask it to do, but basically you get to work with the character to decorate the space a little bit, and then you take a picture, right? So it says, yeah, get a picture with that and me in it. So you pose there and you say, take the picture, and it will take the picture. and then the character will say, oh, that's great, thank you very much, and put it on its Twitter account. So it will have a social media presence, and it will be happy that you're there and want to commemorate the fact that you're there visiting it. Let's do a picture, take a picture, and it will post it up for all its followers to see. And the idea is basically, we want you to feel like you're having a natural conversation, not that you have a list of commands that you can do with this character, but you have a very specific task that the character is going to drive you to accomplish with it. So it's actually, its role is it's in charge. They haven't decided a lot about its personality yet. But it's in charge. You're doing stuff with it. But it's going to be engaging and going to make you want to do that. So these are all areas that we're still going to be experimenting with, sometimes all at once as the technology and the APIs and the other things we have access to start to converge. Well, I'm sure we'll do other experiments that just explore one of these domains and not the other ones. We'd like to finish a little bit with just where I think some of this might be going. And then we can do Q&A if you'd like. I think there's a big difference, other than the obvious, between augmented reality and virtual reality. Virtual reality being it's a whole digital world and we're just enmeshed in that. Augmented reality that we get to have that in our real world. Other than that obvious difference, virtual technology for all of us, not the research groups, but those of us out in the real world, has been a step function, right? We've heard about it and stuff, and then suddenly, boom, there was hardware available and a few apps and things, and people aren't quite sure whether they want to use it or not, and it's an experience thing, and they've never done anything like it before and stuff, right? So real step function, much slower adoption than people had forecasted it would be. I think everyone's supposed to have a VR headset by now. And not happening, I think there's great applications for it, but it's been a really difficult thing for us to get into our lives. AR, on the other hand, is just going to seep in. You're not going to know it happened until you look back. Like this, I mean, you know, there was that day that the first iPhone came out, right? But the idea of having this mobile device and all the things it can do has been much more progressive than suddenly it's like, here, you have this thing that does all that. Because even when the iPhone came out, had limited, it was really an iPod and a phone. And didn't have a lot of other capabilities yet. Those came very quickly afterwards. But now we recognize that when we look back on what it was like 20 years ago before we had these things. And AR is going to be similar to that. So already we're using these now to do augmented reality stuff. And not just in the past few weeks when ARKit and ARCore have been announced, and as of today, accessible to the whole world. But even before that, there were plenty of apps, Pokemon Go, a lot of Snapchat and other photo apps that allow you to overlay things. Very, very simple uses of AR technology without giving you the full augmented reality experience, but little samples of that technology. Likewise, voice interaction. Oh, we have Alexa, we have Google Home, Cortana, Siri, all those things. We're learning to talk to the digital world and have it talk back to us in really natural voices. So that's been a subtle thing. It's like my phone's been able to do that for a long time, and I kind of use it a little more and more, and then there's devices that just focus on that. We'll get used to those things, and next time that it all comes out in a headset, instead of being glass holes who only wear that, we're all going to go, oh, finally, I don't have to hold this thing up in front of me all the time. I can just wear it now. This is great. So it's going to seep in. It's going to feel really natural and easy, and we're not going to know it happened until we look back and say, oh, yeah, that happened. So it'll be really fun to have. And the one other point is it took us 15 years to go from wanting to make fully computer animated feature films to the technology allowing us to do that. My vision of being able to have a character live in my world and be hands-free and untethered and walk around and interact with it in a really natural way is probably 15 years off still. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but at least we're starting to get the beginnings of the tools that we need to make that happen. and it's going to be very exciting. So I'm open for more questions.
That was easy. You know, this stuff's really interesting, and the experiences are pretty fascinating. But it's hard to think that you'd be able to get a lot of people to use something like this until it weighs about as much as this. You know, it's about as obtrusive. You know, and the power.
He's doing this when he says that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the problem there is, how do you get enough battery in there to be able to do the stuff you want to do? Because that's the other issue with any of these mobile devices is enough power to be able to power
there's
it.
all sorts of challenging problems. I don't pretend to know how you solve those, but I do pretend to know that 15 years from now, someone's going to figure that out. Yeah.
But the use of the phone seems like a really good thing for not so much maybe for all these games, but I just want to be able to look at a scene and say, oh, it tells me something about it. Now, that's pretty common, right?
Absolutely.
Basketball, football, there's so much going on here. You seem to have focused your students on the area of animation, but what are the sweet spots for AR today using a phone? And what apps do you recommend that we use? Or try?
Well, I think we're going to see lots of exciting things in the next few months come out. So a lot of the demos that you've seen for both Apple and Android have been really exciting and really fun. They're all, in my opinion, pretty trivial right now. The first app's on the iPhone. The biggest one that was one of the first ones on the iPhone that went really viral was Ocarina, so you would blow into it and play music, right? And then it would show you all the people in the world who were blowing into it and playing music with it. And hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people did that. Some we don't really do with the phones anymore, but it was fun, and it was novel, and it was really unique, and something that we could never do before. I think the first apps we'll see, there's going to be a lot of that, and people will be marveled with it. Beyond that, certainly first for information, being able to scan the world around you and find information about it. Some of the
I want to point my camera at something, and I want it to tell me who that person is, what that building is called.
Yeah, who that person is a little ways off, and all sorts of privacy issues around that, which we'll all just get used to. I think those navigation ones of being able to look around the environment and find out about the building, about where's a bank, that's all months away. I think those things are going to happen really fast because that information is there. It's really accessible, and the tools are there to build that. You'll actually see dozens of those kinds of apps super fast because that stuff's there. They're probably ready to launch with. There's a couple of really fun ones. IKEA is launching theirs, so you can take stuff out of the catalog. That's actually, there have been versions of that, and even from IKEA for quite a while, if you have the right piece of hardware. But the idea that you go to the IKEA catalog, you pick a couch you want, and then you hold it up in your living room and get to see it in your living room. Those kinds of pre-visualization. There's other apps like that for seeing what art would look like hanging on your wall. One of the apps we did with the Tango was the opposite of IKEA. It ended up technically not working that well, but the idea was the opposite of IKEA, which is I take the Tango, I scan my living room, and now I go someplace else and say, oh, that's a neat chair. I wonder what it would look like in my living room. Boom, I get to see it. So it's scanning that live and putting it into a pre-scanned environment. So everything you read about, flip it upside down and see what happens, and do it the opposite way. But I think navigation, see, that's where I think glasses are much better. Yeah.
What about museums?
Museums, another great application. And there's been a lot of demo pieces done of exactly that, being able to hold up your phone, get a lot more information about a particular piece of artwork, a particular sculpture, anything like that.
Yeah, that'd be a nice app too. Then not only that, you can maybe save what you saw.
Yeah.
And then have reference notes.
Or let me bring all of Rodin's sculptures to you.
Exactly.
Right. So rather than I can aim at the real. So this is again turn it inside out. I can aim it at a real Rodin sculpture, learn all about it, or for my classroom, for my home, whatever. Let's put Rodin right there, and let's all walk around and learn about it. And in fact, I can walk up and point to it, and everyone can hold their phone and see what I'm pointing at, right? So we can do it as a multi-user environment. And if you imagine that maybe your classroom all the kids will have phones, that could happen, right? And everyone holds up their phone, and the teacher actually works in this environment. Really engaging for the students, right? It's like, well, this is fun. I actually get to use my phone in the classroom for a real purpose. Oh, wow. Yeah, it goes on and on. Oh, can I add one other thing? So we've been talking about AR strictly, or not strictly, but mostly from a visual standpoint. So there's the audible part of it too. And I'm a huge proponent, if you didn't know by the voice interaction, of using audio as part of augmented reality, right? And so we're seeing Siri and Alexa and everything else, all these voices in our lives. Okay, so I happen to wear hearing aids. My hearing aids happen to be Bluetooth connectable, right? So not 24/7, 18/7, I actually am wearing headphones that you probably can't tell, that are Bluetooth connectable. If I had an iPhone, I can do it if this then that app, that whenever something occurs that if this then that knows about, it can tell me whatever I want it to do. So it could be someone just rang your doorbell. It could be you got a text from your son. Here's what it says. And no one has to know I'm getting that, right? Right now, I could get an emergency message from a family member that said, stop what you're doing, the house is on fire. And I wouldn't be interrupted by a phone.